Good evening, everybody. Welcome to TechVets' first LinkedIn Live. And this evening, we're joined by an absolute panel of experts. So we're going to take a deep dive into the lucrative and exciting world of tech sales. So we'll be talking about everything you need, from what skills you need, what training you can access, if any, and how to identify what type of sales role you're after. If you've just joined us, please say hello in the chat. This live show will be recorded and shared on the TechVets digital platform for those who are unable to join us live. So I'm Colin Grimes, TechVets training coordinator, and tonight I'm absolutely delighted to welcome, and they'll introduce themselves as they go along, and we'll start with Alex Gay.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I left the army about 3 years ago, joined a cybersecurity startup called Senson, also founded by a military veteran, Dave Atkinson, so sort of experience only from Senson, but in sort of a startup environment selling cybersecurity software.
Great, thanks very much. And Josh Keeley.
Hey everyone, I left the Marines about 6 years ago. I'm the founder and director of Trident Search, a cybersecurity recruitment agency, and we focus working with vendors like Alex's, recruiting salespeople into those organizations.
Thanks, Josh. And next we'll come to John.
Good evening, everyone. I work for a company called Braze, which is a customer engagement platform. So if you get emails, push notifications from the likes of Just Eat, Trainline, that's us. Left the army about 7 years ago. Joined Braze when it was a much smaller company. I've seen it growing over the last 7 years. Currently lead the EMEA sales team.
Thanks very much, John. And finally, last but not least, Simon.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Simon Warren. I left the army about 5 years ago, and I'm currently a regional account manager at a company called Dragos. We do industrial cybersecurity.
Thanks very much. As always, if you've got any questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the chat. We've got Meredith working away in the background. She'll bring questions to our attention. Hopefully, we'll answer most of it as we're going along. And if there's anything at the end, we'll open up to the floor if we can. I'm going to kick straight off, and I think I want to start with Alex with this one. What are the different levels of tech sales that we can work in? So if we're looking for maybe there's a sort of the smaller business up to the sort of global tech behemoths.
Yeah, I think you've described the sort of the range pretty well there, Colin. I've got experience working in essentially startups. So Senson was about 20 people when I joined. Over the last 3 years, grown up to about 100. So we've been in that space. We at the time were seed funded, which meant we had a certain amount of money to build a product to take it to market. And in that time frame, have gone from got out and raised more money. So we're now in the Series A stage. So generally, I'd say from that number of 20 to about 100 people, maybe slightly more, is that sort of size. It comes with pros and cons. Obviously, working in a smaller company, you probably have to do a slightly wider range of things. But there are also potentially benefits, from gaining things like stock in the company, potentially a better commission plan and things. But so I can talk this evening around sort of startup sort of sales jobs.
Thank you. Fantastic. Simon, same question.
Yeah, so when I left the army, I went straight into Accenture. So that's obviously complete opposite end to what Alex did. That's a gigantic corporate. I've then moved on through a very small company into a startup and then also into a scale up. So I've got experience across all different sizes. In terms of like the different roles, if you want to go into a little bit of detail there, the big difference for me with the big corporates is you don't have as much of an impact because Accenture 600,000 people. So if I closed a big deal, no one really cared. You had to be doing sort of 7 or 8 figure deals for anyone to even notice. Whereas if you go somewhere a little bit smaller, you're closing a big deal, then it has a lot more impact on the company. It might mean the difference between your next series of funding or even an IPO. So you feel like you have a lot more impact there, and you also get recognized for that as well. So if you close a big deal, you go over your target, you're going to get a lot more commission for that. So that's I often talk to people about considering that when you get out, you've got the sort of the stability and the benefits of a big company, but you don't get the same impact and recognition as if you go and maybe take on a bit more risk in a smaller company, but the potential rewards are much greater.
Thanks for that. And I mean, that's definitely something we talk about in the tech sector as well, is actually sometimes it is that risk versus reward. Do you want to see something grow? And I think I particularly like your idea of you're having to make a mega sale in a big company to be seen. So that's probably something worth thinking about for people. John, your experience there.
Yeah, I guess I've got quite a singular experience because I've only been with Braze since leaving the army. But it was a very different company 7 years ago, about 100 employees, and I was employee number 9 in EMEA. And I look back really fondly at that time. To Alex and Simon's point, like the feeling of ownership and impact was very real back then, and you knew everybody. It was easier to get stuff done, and also the experience of, as the saying goes, kind of building the plane as you fly it. I found that really, really energizing, and it's been a great experience watching things grow up to when we went public back at the end of 2021. Very different space now. I guess the risk goes down, and there's more resources, but things are also a little bit slower. So, if you get a kick out of feeling that immediate impact and having a greater sense of agency, then SME is definitely not a option to discount.
Thanks. And I'm just going to clear up an acronym there, but just so that I get it right, I'm going to let somebody else jump in. Just to clarify what an IPO is.
Yeah, initial public offering. So that's when a company becomes public and is traded on the stock market.
Awesome. So that's when as a company you've hit the big time, really, isn't it? And is that kind of where we're aiming to go? If you're, Josh, you're probably the.
Not, it depends on the owner's mission, I suppose, and the vision of the business, because IPO is all well and good if you are a large organization like CrowdStrike and have multiple service lines, and therefore you can typically tick all the boxes to go public. But some organizations are aiming for the acquisition route. So I would like to be acquired by CrowdStrike instead, because I'm a very small module in the CrowdStrike beast, and therefore we're a niche, super niche player, and that's been very successful. And then there's other methods and avenues as well, like an MBO, so a management buyout. So you kind of get your own team internally to buy the business from you as the owner. Typically not the richest route for an owner, but it means it leaves it in good hands. So it entirely depends on the organization. It's really important for when you are leaving the military and you want to go into a tech sales role, that you understand that mission and vision of the business to go, if I'm going to be working 12-hour days for you, because it is hard, I want to know what's the reward down the end, either for me, what we're aiming towards. So then when customers are asking us, like, what's the point of your business, is you can kind of sell that story and that journey. And then, like Alex has been on, John's been on, Simon obviously in different size organizations, is that you can then kind of look back and go, wow, look how much change has been, and look at us now, more mature, and we've got still all this kind of way to go. So yeah, I feel like kind of explains the different high level routes.
And that's quite good, and probably an interesting time to sort of jump into remuneration there. We had a conversation earlier on our Discord that it's not necessarily about the headline figure, it's the package going along. And I think, Josh, you hit it really well there. If you understand where the company's going, that's probably going to give you a greater understanding of what could come to you down the line as well, whether it's shares in the company or whatever. So there is more to life, I think, when leaving the military than just thinking about that bottom line. I described it as we've all got a red line that we need to be higher than. That's what's going to pay the bills and make life easy. But there's sometimes more to it to look that up. Great, thanks very much. We'll jump into question 2, which I think is probably one of the most interesting questions of the evening. And the term sales comes from, we've probably all got stereotypes in our head of what we think sales is, and this high pressure, pushy, sharp elbows, getting people out of the way because I'm going to close that deal before anybody else is. But what's the reality? And Josh, can I go to you first on that one?
Yeah, so I don't work in tech sales, but I own a recruitment agency. We are salespeople, right? Firstly, it's a stereotype, yeah. And sometimes it's true. If you'd have worked in the 90s on the trade floor, I'm sure you'd have experienced the Wolf of Wall Street life that we've all seen. That doesn't quite exist anymore, not that I've seen. But I think what's the life of a salesperson? It depends on what level you go in at, firstly, what organization you work for, small, large, etc. It can be metric-based in terms of your KPIs. And KPIs is a dirty word. Depends who you ask, but the KPIs are there. So KPI is a key performance indicator, which is basically a metric of, have you done a good job today, this week, this month, etc. It might not be financially driven, right? Because as a new person to sales, you might not necessarily close a deal for the first 3-6 months, etc. So what else can we measure you against to see if you're doing well and what you need training on? But they're there to help you, and if they're fair KPIs, then you should be hitting them weekly, monthly, daily, whatever. But I think the stereotype or the kind of the aura of a salesperson has changed a lot. Companies are going now, and the other guys can kind of back me up or argue this point, which is from selling just licenses to the amount of users, and then it's £10 a license per month, etc., to now like trying to sell a solution. So you can't just get any salesperson bum on a seat to sell a solution. We can go into kind of the key skills required, because it's kind of, I don't want to kind of go into that realm just yet, but to get a salesperson to sell a solution, that can be quite complex, and you might be asking that CISO, for example, to rip out quite a well-known product to come to yours because your solution is better. Then you need to actually understand pain points and all sorts, which I'll let the guys go into more detail, but that takes more than somebody who everyone just assumes we are, no offense, salespeople, estate agents, or recruiters have even worse rep than a tech salesperson, right? But yeah, so therefore it should also, if you come in from the military and you've got really good values and morals and you work hard, it can set you apart really quick, because you should be very different and should kind of shine amongst what you'd call the kind of stereotypical salesperson. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Josh. So same for you, John. So you're working in a different realm. What would you say is your reality?
Yeah, I just want to jump back to that point of remuneration quickly, because I think it's really important. It's often something that people overlook. They're not from a sales world, but we often get fixated, understandably, on the salary. But there's so much more to a sales compensation package with regards to equity, which is really important to the previous point around understanding the vision, the journey of the company, and what that could mean materially in 2, 3, 4 years' time. But also the compensation, the commission element of the plan as well. That's usually an area in which you've got more scope for negotiation, and it's really important to understand, because that's actually where your earnings get really interesting. Sorry for going off piece, but I think it's an important point. It's something that I was definitely kind of quite naive about when I was initially looking at this space. So in terms of the sales realities, yeah, I think the stereotypes are very real. It's certainly something I thought and felt when I was going through resettlement. The reality is that, these tech solutions, as Josh rightly put, are of a sufficient level of sophistication and complexity that those tactics don't kind of wash. These are educated people, sophisticated buyers. There's usually always a lot of competition on the market, and there are structured processes to go through, as well as lots of different inputs from the influence ecosystem to make the right technology decision. And basically, at a high level, companies buy technologies to do one of three things: either improve revenue, reduce costs, or mitigate risk. So your success in the ability to sell your solution is to understand, how you'll make an impact across those three pillars, and then articulate your solution accordingly. So there's not really room for pushiness and the classic kind of dodgy sales tactics. It's fair to say that it's a pressure environment, just from the mere fact that you have a number on your back, and there's many people who work in many companies who that just freaks them out. They don't want to do it. I mean, that's one of the primary reasons why people from our background are a good fit, because we've all been exposed to and dealt with high pressure situations. So when you take that experience and that resilience and apply it to the commercial world, it's only software. No one's going to get killed, and there's usually a higher tolerance for that classic sales pressure.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it now, because I suppose the stereotype will come from things like the double glazing salesman coming around knocking on your door, and that sell once thing. And I think that, Josh, you really hit on that well, that now it's a service that you're selling, and you want people to stay with that service. So there's a bit more, I suppose, on you to keep that relationship, even if you're not quite in the customer's buying cycle now, because in a year's time you want them to come back with you and renew. Simon, your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I mean, as John said, there are stereotypes for a reason. I think some of the really big corporates might tend towards some of those more cutthroat environments, just because they're naturally just more competitive. But everywhere I've been, particularly the smaller places, everyone's kind of pulling in the same direction, especially as we talked about, if you're pre-IPO or you're on a startup or a scale-up journey, everyone tends to be working for the same mission. So there's none of this sort of, oh, it's my deal, that's your deal. Everyone sort of thinks, well, as long as someone closes the deal and someone brings in the revenue, we all grow. And we talked about the point in terms of like getting equity in a company and growing. So that really helps everyone pull in the same direction. And I think just to sort of elaborate on what John said, I don't think of what I do in the same sort of realm as selling a commodity or selling a house or a car. We're effectively solving a problem. So we'll go into a client and they might not even know they've got a problem, or they might say, like John said, we want to increase revenue or we want to reduce risk. And we might have several different solutions at our disposal to solve that problem with. But it's not just a case of you always have this one solution. You buy this, you buy this, you buy this. We're solving a problem, and that's inherently what salespeople are. We're problem solvers. And it's just a matter of how well you solve that problem in terms of how much you sell. And the final thing I would add is I just think it's, I always say it's a bit of a double-edged sword working in sales, because I think all of us work commission, and that's a big thing that attracts people to sales, and that means you're directly compensated for how you perform. So you perform better, you get paid more, and it's very direct. You close a big deal at the end of that month, you're going to get paid more. It's very quick, very direct recognition for your performance. But I say it's a double-edged sword because at the same time, for at least in my experience, it's quite hard to switch off, because you think, oh, do I want to take 2 weeks off because I could be like earning more commission in that 2 weeks? So it's a real mental struggle to really. I don't know how the other guys have experienced this, but I find it really, really hard to switch off. So I just think, oh, 2 weeks off, I could probably close 2 deals in that time, which would put this much more money in my bank account. So it is a real double-edged sword in that sense. But that is, I just think that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me motivated. As long as you've got a really good internal motivation for why you want to make that commission, that's what sort of keeps you going, gets you out of bed every day.
Thanks for that, Simon. And Alex, finally to you. And I suppose your journey with your current company is at that beginning stage, and seeing the company go to kind of where it wants to be in 5-10 years time. So does that make a difference pressure wise?
I think what it does, certainly, yeah, because there's almost like a pressure on the sales team that if we don't deliver sales, then the company doesn't exist in 6-12 months. A company like ours has a finite runway of cash in the bank to use to keep paying the bills, etc. And so there's a reality that if the sales team don't deliver, then the company doesn't succeed. I think for me, in terms of living that experience, the objectivity of it is very different to the pressure you get in the military. So I think we're very suited to high pressure environments, but to some degree, to what Simon says, there's that number's on your head all the time, and so it's very clear. It's either yes or no, you got there or you didn't. Whereas in the military, I was very used to like the slap on the back, you're doing all right, mate, keep going. Whereas in this world, it is very objective. You got your performance indicator or target, or you didn't, and that is a definite change in mindset, and it does take some time to get used to that. And certainly in an environment like Senton, in this sort of ideally high growth stage, that pressure is elevated, because if you don't do it, there's not many other people in the organization who can. But for me, that's the benefit, right? Back to one of the first comments about having impact. My biggest concern from leaving the military was about having a sense of purpose that you no longer had, and being part of a journey that I think most of us here have been on, gave me that I don't think I'd have had if I'd gone and joined a big corporate initially, or as Simon said, the impact of your work isn't felt. And so that's kind of the balance for me. The pressure is kind of worth it, because you see, when you do succeed, you see the impact of it pretty quickly.
Thanks. And I think that impact and sense of mission and sense of worth is something we'll come back to in one of the later questions. So I just want to talk, and bearing in mind we've got a real breadth of experience on the panel, is what could a career in tech sales look like for somebody? So if I come to you first on that, Simon, because I think you've probably got the sort of longest journey with multiple companies.
Yeah, I think I'd start off by saying there's a huge array of roles you can do in sales, and some roles you wouldn't even necessarily think of as a sales role, like an account manager, strictly speaking, it's a sales role. And you might not even have any outbound targets. You might just have a massive account, and we all know one guy works for a massive global corporation, and he's an account manager, and his only job is to retain that account and grow that account. So I traditionally wouldn't have thought of that as a sales role, but that's still sales. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum in terms of it's very much we'd call it a farming role. So you're literally just looking after your one client, not much outbound work at all. Definitely no cold calling or cold emailing. And then right at the other end of the spectrum, you've got something like a BDR and SDR, which is a business development rep or a sales development rep. That's almost like an entry level role, where you are on the phones often, you're doing lots of cold emailing, maybe connecting with people on LinkedIn, you're trying to open that initial conversation. So two different ends of the spectrum, and then in between you've got all different levels of progression, and things like account executives. We've all done that. Account managers. Then you go up to sort of VP of sales, director of sales. So there's all sorts of different career paths. It's not like you sort of start at one role and then work your way up. It's very normal if you weren't coming from the military, it'd be very normal to go into a BDR and SDR role, which is sort of an entry level sales role, and then work your way up maybe to account executive and eventually maybe to VP of sales, director of sales. In all of our instances, though, we've kind of jumped in above that, because a lot of people recognize the value of someone coming from the military, and so you don't necessarily need to go and do cold calling to prove that you can do sales. We trust that you can go in a little bit higher and then start from there. But then even then with my journey, I was basically an account executive, so an individual contributor. Then I was a head of sales. Then I went back to account executive, and now an account manager. So there's no sort of one linear path through it all. It really depends on what you want to do, and that changes over time. You might leave the military and think, I just want to get on the phones and I want to like open loads of accounts and just be working, like, churning through the hard work like that. And then later on think, actually, I just want to have one massive client I really take care of and build a really strong relationship with. And I think that's one of the best things about sales is you're not stuck in a single path. You can zigzag through it all, and you don't even have to go up either. I've got up a bit, then sort of down, then across. And again, coming back to the commission thing, if there's not really a massive incentive for me to become a VP of sales at the moment, because I'm just focused on being an individual contributor, doing a good job at that, and you have the flexibility and you still get the rewards without the additional pressure of being any senior, but you can always just move up at that point. So I guess the sort of the conclusion is that you can kind of like choose your own adventure. There's no one linear path through it, and I think that's one of the best things about sales.
I genuinely think that's something that makes it sound really good and appealing to people, and I think I especially like that idea of sort of multiple jump in, jump out points to be able to suit your life at the time. Josh, again, you've said it's not you. You're not selling tech. You're putting people into those tech roles. I nearly said selling people there. That would have sounded all kinds of wrong. I'm
not an animal, Colin. No, I've got just a couple of things to add. One is if you have a love for tech, you go into sales and you go, actually, I can talk the talk and I love talk about technology and get deep into it. Then you can go into what we call a pre-sales role, a sales engineering position. So you could be the person who helps the account exec, who's probably on the second call, but with a potential customer, to answer the customer's technical questions and help them understand a solution and how it's going to solve something, as opposed to a salesperson selling licenses for a fee, for example. So you can absolutely take that route as well, and then go up through the ranks as well, sales engineering, VP, etc., etc. Another thing to note also is if you look at people that own businesses and run companies and maybe work their way up to CEO or start businesses, but I don't know the percentage, but a lot of them are ex-salespeople. And they're currently salespeople, right? We're all salespeople in any walk of life that you do. Everything you're doing, you're trying to sell something at some point, no matter what role you're in. But more importantly, you look at like CEOs. Alex's boss, for example, he was a sales director at Darktrace, and because businesses run on revenue. Without salespeople, they don't exist, right? So you've got that potential in the future to. Firstly, you're building a massive network and community of people that you're talking to every day. So then if you ever want to set up your own business, you've got this huge network from behind that you've trod that path for 5-6 years, whatever, that you can then go back to and be future customers, or work your way up into the business internally and be that CEO or chief revenue officer, for example. But a few other points just to quickly note, and kind of goes back to a previous point. What path you take and what role you come in at when you leave will totally be dictated, majority, by your lifestyle, by your personality, by do you have kids and you can't be on the phone at 6 a.m. because the kid wakes up then, or can you do a US market and you can work later, or can you do an APAC market and work earlier? So you need to work out firstly, what type of person am I? Am I a farmer or am I a true hunter? Do I want that pressure of new business all the time, or do I want pressure of upselling and retaining customers? And then do I want to work for a huge organization and be a bit more siloed in my particular role? Hey, you sit here, you do this one thing and you press this button and you retain that customer. Or do you want to work in a startup and have to roll your sleeves up and kind of learn as you go and build the plane as it's in mid-flight, because that just suits you better. I'm just a bit more kind of pingy everywhere, and hey, I could do that, and then I've got that tab open, and that might suit you better for a startup life. But then on the flip side, if you're very structured and you need that daily kind of routine, maybe a startup's not quite suited for you, or you'll learn the hard way because you can get pivoted everywhere and you've got fires that you're trying to put out and customers that were going to sign aren't now signing. It's now next quarter. So just a kind of few points to add there. But you could be a technical salesperson, and also you can end up running businesses, which a lot of salespeople do, because again, revenue is what a company runs on, right? So yeah, just a few points there.
I think that's a really good one. And if we look at television, for example, and we look at Dragon's Den, they're all salespeople at heart. That's where they started and where they came from. And I want to pick up another point there that you made, Josh. And Simon, we were discussing this before we went live this evening, but this idea now that we're truly working in a global market, and there is the ability that, I could be sitting in my office here in rainy Northumberland, working hours to suit an American company because that's where my client is at the minute. But again, equally pivoting to the Asia Pacific market, if that's where the work is. And is that the sort of thing? Do you find that brings flexibility to the role in different ways? I don't know, John, have you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, immense flexibility. So I've used to manage a team that had a global footprint, and it's hard work because you're working pretty unsociable hours often, and building on Alex's point earlier, it's difficult sometimes to switch off as well when you combine the spread of a team in different hours with everyone's trying to hit numbers and chase targets. It can become a little bit overwhelming, and I think also we're obviously all hybrid now these days, and you can get so much done remotely, but there is still very much an important time and place for in-person connection, and the value of those meetings, across the sales cycle is very important. So I think it's there's a balance to be struck, and just I'd be conscious of how the team that you're looking at joining is currently operating, how the buyers like to transact and work, and make sure your setup can map to that.
That's, I suppose, really important now is, if nothing else, making sure that we've got connectivity that's going to cope with that, with hybrid working. Alex, so again, at the startup end of the business cycle, how do you see your career going?
Hopefully all right, but I think there's a reality that it's somewhat aligned to the success of Senson again, which gives you that sense of purpose and drive. And I think for me, back to what Simon was saying, I've been in a account executive role, which means I, at a startup, have to find new business and also close business. So there's sort of two parts to my role. But in an organization like ours, there's probably a high upside in terms of remuneration than there would be if I was in a level above in a management role. And so that gives you some potential freedom and sort of more motivation potentially to stay in a role like this. And so again, this whole concept, you've got to promote and go through the ranks, doesn't necessarily translate across. But at a place like Senson or a startup that's going through a growth phase, there is inevitably going to be opportunities to move into leadership roles at some point. The team will inevitably need to get bigger. I think if you can stick it out long enough in a fairly challenging environment, the concept of covering the Asian market and the US market in a startup basically means you work early and you finish late, essentially. So you cover all three, but that's a little bit of a reality of it. So I think an earlier stage company, there are opportunities to grow as the company grows. But I suspect you're kind of relying on that company growth to open the door to some degree for you to move into those positions if they're already filled. And so that's, I think, the reality of a sort of a startup in the growth phase.
Yeah, just on that progression piece, because I think it's a real advantage that military leavers have compared to other organizations. You get exposed to leadership roles and opportunities a lot earlier in your career, way earlier than most people on Civvy Street. And my experience was, but when I was leaving the force, I thought I've got to go to management role. That's my thing. That's what I do. But I took a step back to an IC role, which felt a little bit uncomfortable at the time, but was, in hindsight, was absolutely the right thing to do, because you need that space and that time at the coalface to hone your craft, learn what you're doing, to then be ready if you do want to do leadership in the future. when that opportunity does come up, you're kind of a no-brainer because you've got all that experience that a lot of your peers won't have from the forces.
And I think that's really important as well. And I quite like the honesty there, John, that actually it needed that step back to the coal face as the wrong way of putting it, but that understanding of what the whole business is doing for you to then be able to go on and manage in that business. And we see lots of people leaving the military and it's almost the rank is still nailed onto them. So they have to go into a job with that kind of responsibility. And I think some people realize almost too late that that's not really how the world works. The business world will promote the good people into those management positions because they see what they can do. There is sort of a true meritocracy out there, I think, in most companies that we deal with. Move on. We've probably touched on a lot of these, but I think it's really worth nailing down what you see as the key skills that people need to succeed in this world of sales. And if I can, I'll start with you, John, on that one, if I can.
Yeah, I think you need different skills for different parts of the deal cycle. The evergreen one is communication, definitely. But also, so if you kind of map a sales cycle, it starts with the prospecting, those evangelistic qualities to get attention and get somebody on the hook, and then from there you're kind of an investigator. You're doing a load of discovery around the business, the pain points, the challenges, trying to find an angle to position your solution, and then within that it's kind of business consultancy skills. So mapping the improvements that your solution can provide to the business model and those kind of three value pillars I mentioned earlier. And then once you've got that alignment on, okay, there's value here, we should do something about it. It's then probably a case of like pure project management. There's going to be a load of tech validation steps to go through. There's going to be a commercial work stream. There's going to be a legal work stream. There's going to be lots of different stakeholders that you're going to have to manage and map from your org to their org, which requires high organization and project management skills. And then probably at the pointy end, it's that negotiation and closing. So there's myriad skills. Most people will find what their strengths are and definitely what their weaknesses are early on. And it's not that you have to be brilliant at everything because there's a team around you to support. But yeah, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about being in sales is that you get to wear different hats, throughout the day and across various deal cycles.
Thanks. And one of the things that we get from people leaving the military and sort of moving into the real world is the sort of lack of corporate skills. If I come to you, Simon, while we're talking about key skills, did you find that a problem, or was it a fairly simple transition?
I think I was lucky in the sense that I went to a big company at Accenture. So that is one of the advantages of going to a big company. They'll give you a bit of slack. They'll give you time to get up to speed and to learn the ways of the corporate world. If you go to a small company like Senson, they kind of expect you to hit the ground running. They haven't got 3 to 6 months for you to learn how to be a civvy. So that suits someone who's really ready to like hook in and get involved with everything from day one. But I think the big thing I always talk about is all the transferable skills you get from the military. And a lot of them, when you're in the military, you kind of take them for granted. But when you take them out into a corporate world, it's incredibly evident from day one just how powerful those skills are compared to someone who might have done 10 years in a corporate environment. And I'm talking about things like John's already touched on some of them, but it's things like your communication skills, particularly the confidence speaking in front of people. You can't underestimate how difficult some people find it to stand up in front of a room of potential clients and talk confidently about your product. And it's things like thinking on your feet as well, which links into that. So when that client comes back and says, I don't like what you're talking about because of A, B, and C, do you just crumble under the pressure, or do you have a good comeback? And anyone in the military has been grilled at some point during their training, and they're used to thinking on their feet and either coming up with a good answer or bluffing it. And the third sort of personality trait that I think is really important in sales is mental resilience. Obviously, anyone who's been in the military for any length of time has built up a degree of mental resilience. It transfers so well to sales because you're going to miss your target. You're going to get rejected by clients. You're going to have terrible days where you've just got nothing back from any of your emails or calls. And a lot of people would just give up in that instance, but it's everyone I know in the military has got that sort of, they just don't stop, basically. They'll keep going and going and going. They'll have a terrible year. I think, no, I'm just going to keep going. I'll work out what I did wrong and I'll do something different next year. I'm not just going to quit. And the fourth point is agility as well. You know, when you're in the military, you're changing roles all the time. You're getting posted to new places. You're getting promoted, doing different jobs. You're doing different stuff all the time. I think that's really important in a sales role as well, because we already touched on all the different roles you can be doing. Even within your role, you could be doing completely different stuff on a day-to-day basis. And finally, and then John sort of already touched on it already, but those problem-solving skills, he called them business consultancy skills, but I think at the core, it's just problem-solving skills. And again, day-to-day in the military, you might not realize it, but you're solving problems all day, every day. And they're often, we touched on it earlier, they're often much more important problems. They're a sort of life or death problem. So if you can solve a life or death problem under like a huge amount of pressure, you can solve a problem for a client that wants to increase their revenue or reduce their risk. So they're the 5 things that I think transfer really, really well from the military into the corporate world that actually make that transition much, much easier than I expected it to be. And I found it very easy. And I can say the same for almost everyone I know who transitioned into the corporate world. I found it very easy to excel very early on just by doing simple things like having the confidence to stand up in a meeting and talk about your product when other people were a bit hesitant to do so.
I think that's spot on. If James is watching and is in the chat on LinkedIn, he'll probably throw in a link to the McKinsey report, which covered a lot of those things and those ideas of where the skill sets lay. We do really, I think, misrepresent ourselves at times in the military. I had an EOD tech the other week talking to me, worried about how he was going to cope with the high pressure world of corporate when he left the military. And I was like, if you can't deal with pressure, then nobody can. But I think it's what becomes your norm, isn't it? If that's your everyday life, to then think of life beyond that as something different, it is a big step. Alex, can I come to you on this next? Because I think I want to come to Josh last on this one, from the sort of recruitment point of view, what you're looking for in somebody.
Sure.
You know, I think that most of the points have been like really well covered, I think, by John and Simon. What we look for when I've been involved in the recruitment of people here is all those things, but we break it down, and it might be useful for then. Josh has probably got views on this as well about how we then assess people who are going through our sort of recruitment process, which is using the ICE criteria. So intelligence, character, coachability, and experience. Now, clearly, when I went through this, my experience of selling cybersecurity software was 0. But you bring other experience that is really valuable from all those points that have been made about our military experience. But I think coachability in this world, when you're leaving the military, is super important, because you know you're picking up a new skill, probably in a new profession, certainly, possibly, like for many of us, selling something that we had no experience of. But the reality is, in the military life, you change jobs so frequently that you have to be coachable, you have to learn quickly. So I think we tick those boxes very well. In terms of character, this is, I think we've talked about it, but like things like resilience and using initiative are the 2 things. Certainly in a startup world, the ability just to get on with it. As Simon said, we don't make our targets frequently. You're not going to necessarily have those big deals early on in a career like at Senson. But when they do start coming in, then it's really worth it. And so that resilience, I think, is for me the standout characteristic that has led us, the people who've done well at Senson in there. And finally, intelligence, because of all the things that, the complexity that John talked through, the process and some of the challenges that Simon described, you know, you don't have to have a high EQ, but I think, IQ, but sort of good EQ is really important in this. And we look for a bit of both when we're looking for people. You know, are they intelligent enough to deal with the complexity of a complex, several £100,000 deal, dealing with sort of board level conversations? And so for me, they're the 4 sort of buckets that you can start to put these characteristics in that are probably quite helpful if you're preparing for an interview or looking at these, of sort of making sure you've got examples of those sorts of things ready to go.
Shall I roll into it, Colin? Yeah. I had ICE written down in front of me, Alex. Cheers, mate. So I've got nothing to say now. The number one thing I take out of what everyone's just said is most of us that leave the military in some form, or way, shape, or form, have all of those skills. So if you're now competing against each other going for a sales job, how do you stand out? And it comes down to 2 things, in my opinion, and also what our clients are looking for all the time. Intelligence, absolutely intelligence. So how do you demonstrate that in an interview? It's, I understand the cybersecurity market. This is what I've researched. These are threat actors I'm aware of. This is who they're attacking. These are sectors and manufacturers get smashed by the nation states in the Far East because of X. So therefore, interviewing for your role, your company, I know your product. Could we go and target the German manufacturing sector? Do you do any of that? And asking those types of questions, they're like, this person's thinking the right way, and they're trying to connect the dots because they're doing their research into the industry, and then trying to fit where our product, or trying to see where our product fits into that environment. Now, it's very easy to do that once you've been in the industry for a while, but doing some very high-level research at least gives the interviewer an idea of, okay, this person's intelligent enough to try it. Imagine now when they're in our environment, surrounded by our people, talking the same language all the time, give them a few weeks, a few months, they'll be up and running really quick. So that's one thing, intelligence, and I'll come on to another reason as to why in a second. And then the second thing is, I'm going to call it networking, but everyone, that word is so overused. It's the sociability, if that's even a word, of us military people. We are pack animals. We like being around each other. We like going to a pub for a beer. We like doing sports together. We like going to the gym together. So you firstly have to get used to the fact you're going to be sat behind a desk most of your day. But then secondly, it's how do you get away from your desk and go out and meet prospects and go to networking events and put yourself out there. And I see Alex all the time on the Sense stand at InfoSec and all the expos. And you're just talking to people and engaging, and because you just want to learn from new people and just say, hey, who are you? Like, what do you do? Like, do you know about our product, etc. So the social aspect of veterans and serving military personnel is super, super important here. I know it sounds obvious and everyone always talks about networking, but when someone comes to me and goes, hey, I'm currently serving, I'm out in September, I want to roll in tech sales. Firstly, obviously, I know they come with those prerequisite skill sets that we've already spoken about, but if they come to me and said, hey, I know I want to be an account exec in some sort of cybersecurity company, I'm connecting with people that potentially might buy from me in 6 months' time now. I'm trying to connect to CISOs, I'm trying to connect to heads of security operations. I'm connecting those people with those people and just making myself known. And if they can then demonstrate that into an interview, we already know you're a networker. We know you're building that kind of community on your LinkedIn as an example. And you're already thinking that way. So the kind of networking piece is really important. Combine that with intelligence and understanding of the market, the product, etc., will take you a long way, because we all have these other underlying soft skills. And then the last piece was just about how when I hire salespeople into my team, I probably hired 10 military in the last 4 years, all walks of life. And the reason why, if anybody's not with us now, is the reason why they struggle is getting used to being behind a desk all day. And that kind of like being in that kind of, we're not corporate at all, right? Wear t-shirts and shorts and flip-flops, but understanding that you're not going to be in the wild, walking through the woods, breathing in the fresh air all the time. Having a hybrid work in life is great, and that can enable you to do that. But if you're in the office twice a week, get used to being sat behind a desk, because that is, I don't know the percentage, but it's a higher percentage of your job. To caveat that, I can tomorrow go for a walk and take my dog for a walk down the canal, and I can take 4 phone numbers with me and call people. So there is that kind of balance, but just get used to the fact that you will be behind a desk, behind a TV, a laptop at least, and you're going to be plugging away for quite a while, especially at the start of your career, building that network. Intelligence and networking is I think, is just to kind of layer on to those soft skills that hopefully a lot of people have when they leave.
Great. Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button there. What I found really interesting there is on a webinar where we're talking about tech sales, is nobody's talked about tech skills. And I suppose what that says to me is you don't need to be the most techie person in the world, as long as you've got, as you've all said, kind of an understanding of your product, how it's going to fit into somebody's problem solving, because that's then what your tech team are going to do, and that they will do the tech part while you're doing the talking to people. So that's really, really interesting, and it sort of resonates with me. I'm not, although I work for TechVets, I'm not the techiest person in the world. And I think probably some people watching are thinking, I really need some tech skills to get in, but we're not talking deep level. So I suppose the $64 million question is why then are our veteran and military community, why are they suited to those careers in tech sales? And I know, Simon, you had a burning desire to come in first on this.
I think I kind of covered it on my last answer, to be honest. I think, I went through the 5 main character traits I think transfer really well. And I think that just reiterate that's why veterans are so well suited, because we've got all those character traits that allow us to excel. And everyone I know who's transitioned from military either into something else, then into tech sales, or directly into tech sales has excelled. Good example, a guy I worked with last year, he went into tech sales as his first job straight out of the army, no experience whatsoever. And last year he was the highest performing salesperson globally in the company I was working for. No experience whatsoever. So I think that tells you, you don't need tech skills, that's for sure. He was a rifleman. So you don't necessarily need any sales experience either, to the points that I talked about, and then Alex and Josh talked about the ICE characteristics. So I think that's why it's so good for veterans, because there are very low barriers to entry, and if you're good, you get compensated for it. You get compensated and you get recognized. So for me, it's the best balance I've found between your work-life balance, what Josh was talking about. Go for a walk during the day if you want, do whatever you want. So balance between your work-life balance and your compensation. Yes, you could probably earn a lot more money, go and work for Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan in the city, but you're going to work 15 hours a day. Or you could work hardly any hours doing something else and not make as much money. I think sales is a fantastic balance between actually having some time and some flexibility and getting paid reasonably well. And it's really making the most of a lot of skills you've gathered in the army or the military.
Thanks. And Josh, I guess we've kind of touched a lot of this about why people are suitable, but you're putting people into these roles. So how easy do you find it to put veterans into those positions?
Firstly, the challenge with that, and then I'll come on to why it's easy. The challenge is saying to a colour stripey, hey, I know you've led a troop of blokes before, and you've done all the logistics for a deployment, but right now you're going to have to be an account exec, an individual contributor to what John said earlier, get on the coalface and actually in the trenches and learn the job. Otherwise, how are you going to lead a team of account execs if they go, well, you've never sold anything in your life, like you don't understand the methodologies and how to, etc. Right? So that's the first thing, is kind of having those frank conversations with the salaries at account exec level are pretty good. BDRs these days are making 35, 40K, right? Which is the kind of entry level role, so to speak. So that's kind of like a sergeant. I don't know what the salaries are in the military anymore, but that's like the sergeant level, I assume. So you've got your kind of red line sorted. Everything over that is just commission, right? So that challenge straight away is the reality of you're not going to lead a troop of salespeople anymore. Let's get real right now. Serve your time, be recognized internally, and then you will get spotted and dragged into those kind of leadership roles if that's what you want. But the majority of employers that want veterans into their kind of sales teams are either run by veterans and they know exactly what they're going to get, and that's very common, John being one of them, or they know they're going to get a reliable, like a safe pair of hands who's just going to come in and graft their ass off, because we haven't seen that type of money before. Also, especially in the Marines, where it's quite slow promotion pathways, we have never been recognized or rewarded directly for all of the hard work we do. So back to the point previously, I think Simon made it, which is the harder you work, the more money you make. I know it's cliche and it's very salesy to say that, but it's true. Otherwise, why are people in sales? Why would you go choose a tough job where you have a number over your head if you're not going to get directly rewarded for it? So so that's the challenge. Recognizing that you're not going to be able to be a leader straight away, potentially, depending on who you join. But the harder you work, the more you make. It's certainly a meritocracy. And we didn't always get that in the military. So that, I think that's quite appealing for people. But employers love us because they know it's going to hit the ground running and work hard, and they're going to get some results from us and success because we've never seen it before in terms of those figures of money, etc. So hopefully that makes sense.
And Alex, your take on that then? Why veterans?
I think for everything we already said, the one thing that we haven't touched on, I think, is and it goes definitely back to what Josh is saying there about the humility. I remember, like on week 3, I was still in theory serving, and like having sort of like 3 weeks earlier been doing some quite significant like briefings in the MOD to being told to fuck off by someone on a cold call. Like it pretty much puts me it puts me in place pretty quickly. But I feel like the military prepares you for that in a strange way. And the scenario I was in is like, well, I've got to go and pick up the phone in 30 seconds and make that call to someone else. And this goes back to all those traits we just talked about, having the sort of resilience to get over that, and then the intelligence to work out a better way to communicate with someone next time, so that isn't the response you get. I just think, the rounded nature of someone who's left the military, even after a short period of time, just puts them in a good stead for something which is incredibly varied and often very complex.
Thanks for that, Dan. I think that's a tremendous analogy there. And it's almost like the boxer idea, isn't it? It's you're going to get repeatedly punched in the face at some way. We've got to work out how to dodge that punch and get our own in.
And there's one other point, sorry, Colin, just to finish on, is there is also no barrier to entry. So you do not need a professional qualification. There are not courses that you have to do. There are not things that, are barriers to someone leaving the military after 3 or 30 years that prevent you from joining our organization. We've just had a guy join our sales team as a business development rep. He's not military, but he's spent his entire career to date in the TV industry as a producer, and now has decided at the age of 40, essentially, to move into sales. And so it's a career that you can jump into later on in your sort of overall career without having to go and commit a lot of time into education or re-education or whatever there might be. So there are very few barriers to this other than the things you have intrinsically within yourself. So I think that's another reason why it can be a great option.
Thanks for that. And same question to you, John.
Well, my turn to go last. Yeah, this is hard because these are all really relevant, great points. And I was actually going to pull the layout the humility one, but Alex got to be first on that one as well. So no, I think the point Alex makes on both coachability and humility are super relevant. So the success in pretty much anything in life really is based on knowledge, skills, and attitude. The attitude piece for the military community is kind of a given. High levels of motivation and understanding for the importance of values and standards, and that resilience we spoke about earlier. But it's the knowledge and skills piece which is probably going to be the gap. So that coachability, your appetite and capacity to learn is super relevant, and not just for the transition, but it's evergreen because the tech world moves so quickly. Market trends, capabilities, it's changing quarter on quarter, year on year. So what we knew last year just isn't relevant anymore. You're constantly having to be learning, and that coachability that definitely speaks to intellect as well. And yeah, on humility, I think it's spot on. That icy role that I found myself in, whilst it was a bit unnerving, it was kind of a double-edged sword because I knew I was going to be the dumbest person in the room for 6 months. And I tried to lean into that and use it as my superpower, just asking all of the bone questions. And I was blown away the amount of times when someone said to me, "Oh yeah, I was thinking that as well." So you can really learn a lot when you kind of resign yourself to the fact that I know nothing here, and I'm just going to be a sponge, and it'll probably accelerate your path as well. And also the flip side of that IC piece for anybody who's kind of forged their career in leadership, it's actually quite liberating. And I found it quite exhilarating to only have to worry about your own performance. And you'd probably be surprised at what you can achieve when you're just focused on that rather than, chasing around a section or a platoon.
Thanks. We've got a couple more questions before we wind it up for the evening. The next one, Alex, you kind of jumped into this. At TechVets, we see lots of people coming in knowing what training or asking what training to do, what courses they need to do to get roles in tech or cyber or wherever. We know there's lots and lots of sharks in the water around the military community because we know, or they know, that people tend to have access to this pot of money that isn't really theirs to pay for training. So if you were going to recommend any training for somebody to do, what would it be? And Alex, I will go to you on this first because I know you've got a really strong view on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there are any there are training courses you can do that you can pay for what we call sort of qualification. I think, as in most things, are frameworks that organizations will use to build their sales process, but they are very unique to that organization. And there are some things that often will translate across most of them. And this is about how you qualify your opportunities, because your time, as we mentioned earlier, is your salary essentially. So you want to make sure you're spending your time in the right place. And so you can go and do things that teach one of those frameworks. Medic is one of the very popular ones, but the reality, I think, you'd be better spending your time not doing something like that. And as Josh said, speaking to people who are doing these roles, certainly if there's an organization or a sector you're interested in specifically, go and find ex-military people in that role and other salespeople in that role and in those organizations, and speak to them, understand how their organization qualifies people for in their HR process. We talked about the ICE criteria previously, and understand the processes they use for qualification for their sales. And then you can arm yourself with relevant skills, I think, for that interview. Now, it's maybe quite a long process, that, but as Josh said, like, networking around this industry seems to be, for me, the most effective way to use your time. Number one, to find a job, and number two, to make sure when you're in the job, you can be effective, because cold calling and cold outreach has a limit in terms of its value, but your network that you've built, I think, is how you can be really successful as a salesperson. And that ex-military community, for me personally, has been hugely valuable in enabling me to get out there and speak to people who, without that connection, I wouldn't have. And so I would rather spend my time, if I was in transition now, networking into the right sort of organization, the right sectors that I want to be working within, rather than necessarily going doing a course and maybe spend your learning credits on something fun instead.
Thanks. I'm going to jump into Sean's question there. So Sean's saying, how is the global slowdown in tech hiring affecting the availability of tech sales roles? So he's in his experience of mainly the large enterprises, and we know the Googles and the Amazons and the Microsofts of the world's either laying people off or on that hiring freeze or slowdown. Do we have any thoughts on how that's going to get better over the next 6 to 9 months? So, if somebody's thinking of pushing the buttons to freedom now, are things going to get better? Josh, you're probably quite well placed to.
Also, everybody unmute themselves because everyone wants to talk about it. I put a post out on LinkedIn today, actually, quite timely, about I speak to investors a lot because they take us with them when they invest in a company, because then they want to grow the business, right, and see return on revenue or investment. Q1 and Q2 was tough, right? Everyone make no bones about it. Unless you're a super niche, if you're just trying to ask a customer to rip out the same products as you've got, but you've got a slightly different take on it or a different marketing spiel, then good luck, right? Renewals were through the roof in the first half of the year, because it's just easier, because your product's not that much better or different. So I'll just renew, right, as a customer. But talking to the investors and to give everyone a bit of hope, Q3, Q4 is already looking on the up. We're busier than ever with requirements. And we're seeing the idea for the first half of the year was investors were going, we're going to hold off for a second, and we're going to see who can actually survive when times are really tough, who can actually make the most of their runway, which is about the amount of cash they've got in the bank until they need investment again. And then we'll invest in them ones, because they've got the reputation. They've obviously got a very good product. So we saw less announcements of rounds of funding and etc. In the first half of the year. But now we're getting told, and I'm speaking to partners at VCs and stuff like 1011 and other cyber focused, obviously a bit biased here, saying that, hey, yeah, we're going to now release the checkbooks, and we're going to release the hounds, and we're going to start you're going to see way more companies. I spoke to 2 today who have just signed for the next round of funding, companies, but then announced it in just after the summer. So we're seeing a big upturn in the second half of the year, kind of weathered that storm, so to speak. Don't get caught up too much in the news around the big tech firms. Of course, they're going to be ones that do the big PR releases, and reporters are going to say, hey, Amazon fired 12,000 of their staff this month. You're like, yeah, but during COVID, they hired nearly 750,000. So actually, it's like less than 1% of people are making redundancies, right? So you have to look at it kind of relative. There are many of our clients, again, I'm biased, we're looking at kind of the Sensons of the world, the Series A, Series B, under kind of 250 kind of head count, that are making too many redundancies because they are running lean, they're running sustainable, and investors in these companies knew this time was coming. We were just waiting post-COVID of when it was going to hit, and it's 2023, right? Because it's all doubled up with the conflict, etc. So things are definitely looking up. It did slow down in Q1, Q2. Most of the journalists were reporting on the big tech firms because everyone knows those names. If they start reporting on the small cyber vendor that made 4 redundancies last month, no one's going to give a shit, right? So it doesn't make a big, there's no clickbait for them. So, and if you're targeting the big tech firms, I can't really talk too much in terms of the hiring plans and patterns. I don't know. But in terms of the startup, scale up, hyper growth companies, it's kind of business as usual in Q3, Q4. I don't know, Sim, you may have a different opinion with Dragos being kind of size it is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I know lots of people are losing their jobs at the big companies. Personally, I just think they were bloated. So they're just right sizing for the amount of revenue they create. Accenture is a good example. They were up to, I think, 700,000 people, which is unbelievable. They hired something like 200,000 people in 2 years. It's just ridiculous. Way too many people for the amount of revenue they're creating. So they have to right size when the economy starts slowing down. We're still hiring. We sort of downsized a bit in the US, but expanded massively in Europe, and we continue to hire across Europe. So I think my point is, you need to find those organizations that are still hiring. They are out there. I don't know if we can share the link, Colin. There's a website called stillhiring.today. There it is. So that's a list of all the companies that are actively hiring in the world right now. It's created by a guy from LinkedIn called Corporate Bro, worth following if you don't follow him already. But it's a really useful resource there, and that's telling you who's hiring right now. You can arrange it by country, look at who's hiring in the UK, and there are companies that are hiring out there. They're just the ones that, as Josh said, they're the ones that are still on those growth journeys, and they do exist. If I think about Dragos, what we provide, the economy slowing down doesn't change the fact that people need to protect their critical infrastructure. So we're still growing. We're landing new clients every single day because it's essential to them. You look at the likes of Twitter and Facebook. How essential is Twitter and Facebook to people? They like it, but it's not essential. So if people have a choice, they're going to stop paying advertising revenue on Facebook and Twitter, and then they get the slowdown. We haven't seen that slowdown in revenue to the same degree, and hence we're still hiring. Just using that as an example, but there are lots of other companies out there just like us who are still hiring, and hopefully that website will help everyone out there find them.
And I think that's really important to remember. I suppose as we become more reliant on tech, and especially into the realms of the critical national infrastructure stuff, that's only ever going to be a growth market. There isn't going to be as much of a slowdown there. There may be less money being spent right now, but those things still need protected. They still need systems that look after them. And they're still going to need people. That's really all we've got time for this evening. We've got a little bit over time there. So if we haven't answered your question, or if you want to follow up, head to the TechVets website or the TechVets Discord if you're in there, or drop us an email via our website, techvets.co. You can register with us there. You can get free impartial advice about all things tech and cyber, what courses to take, future career options, and we can put you in touch with people like the people on our panel tonight who will help you take that step out of the military or that step to new employment. Thanks very much to our panel of experts tonight, Josh, Simon, Alex, and John, for your time and effort this evening and bringing your experiences and insights to the TechVets community. The recording will be available at some time in the future. The link will go out on our LinkedIn when it's ready and on the TechVets website. All that's left me to say is thank you very much for joining us this evening. What has been a very, very informative evening. I'm about to go and register with Josh for my new career.
Don't waste your time.
That's it. I'm old and past it, and ex-Air Force, and you guys are all the young, thrusting things. But thanks very much for your time, and we'll see you all soon on the next one.
Cheers, Colin. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers.